my people. Now, what we've been doing in this series is looking at meals that either Jesus made, like feeding the 5,000, or meals that he was invited to, and we're looking specifically at the types of things he says while he's eating, because he says some really important things. He tells us kind of how to live life over these meals, what we should look like as followers of Jesus. And the other thing that he does is compares his kingdom to eating. He calls it this great banquet. One day we'll end up at this great banquet. And so this is a very, very big deal. And many times, I don't know if you've been like this, but the gift of hospitality is just kind of one of those like little things. It's like, oh yeah, I have the gift of hospitality, not a big deal. No, this is a very big deal. Because I don't think it's a gift for just a few folks. I'm from the deep South. And you're just, oh, hey, yeah. Do you have an accent too? I have one. Anyway, if you're from the deep South, you're just taught to be hospitable. It's like you're supposed to do it. I think everybody's supposed to do it. It's not just a Southern thing. It's not just a woman thing. It's an everyone thing. And so this morning, we're going to look at that. And I hope throughout this series, because it's not going to be going much longer, that you as the people of God feel an invitation from the Lord and even hear us clearly say, we want you to try this stuff on. We want you to look like Jesus. We want you to begin to open your tables in your homes and be hospitable to your neighbors, to your coworkers, to families that don't know Jesus, to school friends, to sports teams. I mean, to college roommates, to whoever. Open your homes and your lives and begin to be hospitable the way Jesus did. I'm just letting the cat out of the bag. That's what we'd like you to do. And if you haven't felt that invitation from the Lord, we want to pray that you do, because again, we see Jesus do this so much. Now, as a Southern person, I just want to tell you, for me, the hardest thing about throwing a party is knowing who to invite. Now, that's for a lot of reasons. It's because, first off, y'all, I'm just going to let you know, I'm extroverted. If you don't know me, I'm super outgoing, and I'm cursed by being an includer. So, I don't want anybody to ever be left out. But the reality is when we throw parties, how many of you know you've thrown a party and you've hurt someone's feelings because you didn't invite them? Or worse, you've been the one that wasn't invited and it hurt you. This happens all the time. And so this creates great anxiety in us about who do we invite to these parties that we throw? Because the reality is some of you are going like, well, girlfriend, what's it for? Is it for children? Is it for an adult? And then, I don't know about you, but in the American world, not probably the Nepali world, we think about, well, where's the party going to be and how many people does the room fit? And there's all these social norms that create these anxieties in us about who should we be inviting to these parties, right? It's a really, really good question. And what's exciting is Jesus kind of tells us who and how we should throw parties. And so today we're going to look at that. We're going to look at the book of Luke 14, specifically that chapter. And I can't read the whole thing to you because it's super long, and I don't want to run out of time because baptisms are really fun. But today, what I want you to hear me say is, if you look, I'd love for all of you to commit to me this week that you're going to look at this chapter outside of today, because I'm only going to be able to touch it, barely. It's chock full of amazing things. If you give just all your time this week to reading Luke chapter 14, you won't be sad. There's so much to cover in it. And so please do that outside of this morning, because what Jesus says to us in Luke 14, he says, you can tell a lot about a person's spirituality by the kind of parties they throw. And specifically by who they're willing to invite to those parties. It's kind of a big deal. It says a lot about who you are and the way you follow Jesus by the kind of parties you're willing to throw and the kind of people you're willing to invite to your parties. And that's what we're hopefully going to learn today as we look at this. Now, again, the passage is super long, and so I'm only going to kind of give you a summary of it. But here's what happens. Jesus gets invited on Sabbath to go to a party at a prominent Pharisee's house. Now, guys, by this point, the Pharisees are not super big friends of Jesus, you know. And while he's at this party, I want you to picture this, okay? So be imaginative. Maybe even close your eyes if you need to help your brain think about it. While Jesus is at this party, he starts telling the host of this party how he should host a party. Guys, you don't do that. You don't show up to someone's house, sit down at their table and be like, you're doing it all wrong. This is bad. Everything in me this week was every Southern thing in me was no, Jesus, what are you doing? Because it's really controversial. It's very controversial because, again, he sits being hosted and then has the audacity to tell that host how he should be hosting that party. It's very awesome. Now, it's Sabbath, so that's a big detail. So on Sabbath, Jesus goes to this Pharisee's house for this party, and while he's there, a man from the outside comes into the party. Now this man, and a lot of commentators don't have a lot to say because no one really knows why the man came to the party, but this man was swollen all over his entire body. So what we get is that he's probably an outcast by how he looks, and he definitely wasn't the right person to come into the party, but he just came in anyway. And Jesus says to the table, "Should I heal on Sabbath?" And the reason he does that is because he knows that the Pharisees are trying to trap him. You see, the Pharisees have set up all these religious systems. If you haven't read the Bible, the Pharisees are very religious, and they have all these rules, especially on Sabbath, about what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do. So Jesus is like, I know you're trying to trap me, so I'm just going to ask the obvious question. Is it okay for me to heal this guy on Sabbath? And because they are so desperate to trap Jesus, they are so desperate to catch him in a moment and go, you did the wrong thing, and punish him, no one will answer the question at the table. And so what do you think Jesus does? He heals him anyway, because Jesus is awesome. So he heals the guy anyway. And then quickly, Jesus launches into 3 very exciting teachings. Again, you should read them on your own, and gives some really clear advice to us about what our parties should look like and who we should invite to those parties. And so I'm going to spend the rest of the time going through these 3 pieces of advice that Jesus gave. All right? Can you follow me? Is that okay? Oh, no. Some of you are quietly nodding. Can you follow me today, people? Oh, there we go. Okay, good, because I don't want to do this by myself. All right, here we go. Ready? A piece of advice number 1, don't promote yourself. Don't be proud. Okay, so I'm not going to take time to read the whole thing because it's a bunch of verses, but basically this is what Jesus teaches in this moment. He says, hey, if you're invited to a party, don't show up and demand attention, because you may get embarrassed when you show up and find out there's other people in that room that actually deserve and need the attention. He also says, hey, do your best when you're invited into a party to come with an attitude of service. You see, Jesus says this in a very specific example. He says, many of you are showing up to these parties, you're looking at the table and you're trying to pick the exact best seat. He says, hey, don't do that. He says, show up to the party and step back and let everyone else have the pickings of the seats, and you take what's left over. Why does this matter? Well, because Jesus says people are showing up with all this privilege. Even just the invitation to the party is favor. And you show up needing showboaty attention and needing the best seat. No, in order to show the heart of God, when you get invited into a space, you show up with the attitude to serve, and you give away the best space, and you take whatever's left over. You use whatever favor God has given you to help others. That's what Jesus is trying to say in that piece of advice. Piece of advice number 2, he says, invite people who don't usually get invited. Host parties where you know you won't be repaid. You see, it's really funny. Jesus basically says, have parties where people who are usually not considered important are the honored guests. This shows the heart of God. And this is how he says it. We read it earlier, but we're going to read it again. Luke 12, verses 12 through 14. Then Jesus said to his host, when you give a luncheon or dinner, do not invite your friends, your brothers or sisters, your relatives, or your rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back, and so you'll get repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. Guys, this is really hard. Like, I prepared for this sermon, and I was like, oh no, I don't like this, Lord. This convicts me. I really like my table full of my friends and my family. And it's really hard to open up my table to people that are hard to love. This is not easy. You see, we should be using our wealth and our influence to help those who can't help themselves. And then God is the one that rewards us. That's what this is saying. And guys, this is why our church really wants to be a church that serves the poor, helps refugees, cares for those in need. And even just last Sunday. So last Sunday, I was able to not be on stage doing anything except announcements. It was really fun. And so I got to kind of be out there. And we had a group of homeless friends that felt very welcome to our Sunday morning party. Maybe some of you met them, maybe you didn't. But I loved it. I noticed some of them were freshening up in our bathroom, and they were eating muffins and enjoying fruit and drinking coffee on the patio. So I just went out front and met all of them. And I was like, I'm so glad you're here this morning. You're so welcome. And one of them right away was like, I haven't been to church in 9 years. And I was like, that's okay. We're so glad you're here. And guys, we pump, like right now my voice is going out on the patio, which is scary, but it's cool. And so they can hear the sermon. So I was like, guys, you're so welcome here. Hey, I hope, and I just said to the guy that's like, I'm shy and I haven't been here in 9 years, and he was like having an anxiety attack almost. And I said, hey, peace to you. You're so welcome here. And my prayer for you is that you'll feel Jesus' love this morning, even as you sit on our patio. And then I was like, but hey guys, just so you know, our service after this talking is over, we're gonna have some music and we're gonna have prayer, and I want you to feel like you can participate in any of it. So please, if you feel brave, you're welcome to come into the room and participate with us. Please feel welcome, right? And I didn't think any of them would take me up on it. And sure enough, I'm sitting back here and 2 of them come in during the musical worship. And I look over and I'm like, oh, they came. Yay. And the Lord's like, go pray for them. I'm like, no. You know? And then I did, and they just cried the whole time. They just, and then the woman, there was a couple, the woman was like, thank you for praying for us. I just feel loved. And I said, that's the whole point, right? And then after the services, I don't know if you knew this, but our kids ministry, Lindsay Bell, has been collecting money from our kids that were doing chores and different things for this nonprofit called Beyond Home. And she, to honor the kids, because they raised $600 on their own, she hosted a party out here. And so my kids were a part of this, so Kyle and I joined, and they had pizza, and then it was the best thing. We all walked, listen, 0.8 miles, that's nothing, down this road, up this street to Beyond Home, where the good work of God's kingdom is happening. We got to see their facility because the $600 that the kids gave bought hygiene items and food for their food pantry. And we got to hear all about the good work that Beyond Home is doing to bring families that are on the street, off of the street, give them dignity and resource them for sustainable living where they can live on their own, like paying their own rent, their own mortgages. This was beautiful. You see, this is the good work that our church is trying to do. This is the kind of people that God's like, hey, make them your honored guest. It's challenging. And you see, those are just stories. I could tell thousands of those stories, but let me just be personal with you. I've done this before, but some of you don't know. I was the outcast growing up. My church growing up provided for my family. I was invited to the party because my parents couldn't always afford our mortgage. My parents couldn't afford church camp. My parents couldn't afford Christmas. I was impoverished as a child, and it was because of the invitation of the local church that I got to live a normal life. My soccer got paid for that way. Soccer, for you Brits, that's football. A lot of my life was paid for because of this sort of living, because of the outcast being invited into the party and people helping my parents so that I didn't know that my life was different than others. I'm so grateful. So, so grateful. And now I get to be a part of doing that. Now, Jesus ends this passage, his last piece of advice is even more challenging, if that's possible. Jesus does this double inception, double rainbow sort of moment. You're like, what do you mean? Well, again, he's sitting at a party, critiquing the party, and then at the very end of this chapter, he starts to tell a story or a parable about a party. Double inception. Sitting at a party, talking about another party. And Jesus uses this story of this parable to convict many people, I hope this morning, that already know and follow Jesus. You see, he tells the story about this person, this master, this host that throws this banquet. And he's invited people in the beginning. And you get the sense, and the commentators say this too, that they've already said yes. So it's people that, the right people. He's invited them, hey, I'm hosting this banquet. I want you to be there. And they're like, sure, sure. And then the banquet gets there and they don't show up and they give the lamest excuses. One of them's like, I bought a field and I need to go look at it. Another one's like, I bought some animals. I got to go check on them. The last one's not so lame. The last one's like, I just got married and we're doing other things. It's in the Bible. You should read it. Anyway, and that was a little less lame. But these people are like, sorry, we got better things to do. So the master's like, hey, listen, servant, go out to the street and grab everybody. Grab the lame, grab the cripple, grab any person, grab the wrong people and fill my table. So the servant does that. And he goes to the master, he goes, Master, there's still more seats at the table. He goes, go even further. Go to the country. Go to the edges. Get anybody and everybody and bring them to my table. The servant does that. There's still space at the table. And the master, when the servant comes back this time, the master says, hey, listen, you know those people I originally invited that were too busy? They're not invited to my table. Even though there's space, they will not taste the goodness of my banquet. Whew. That's challenging. Jesus is talking to people like you and I. And what he's saying to us today is, hey, his last piece of advice, don't miss my invitation for your life. Don't get too busy to do the things I actually have asked you to do. Don't be so insecure that you're like sitting around waiting to be invited to something and you're just hurt because no one's including you. Go out to the streets and grab whoever you can. Don't fall into the trap of the enemy around isolation and loneliness. You've already been invited. You've said yes to Jesus. Now invite everyone else around you to feast with you on who Jesus is. Guys, I feel this real personally because right now I have some neighbors that I love, and we've known each other. I've lived in my house for 6 years now, and I've known one couple the whole time we've lived there and another couple in the last year, but we really know them, and they're pretty open with how much they don't like what I do. Like, they're very uncomfortable. Like, they don't like it at all. But they're nice, but they're awkward. And everything in me wants to drive my car into my garage and push my garage button down and go in my house and feel okay about who I am and ignore the fact that I know they not only don't believe what I believe, but they don't like what I do or believe. And every time Jesus is like, is that what I would do? No. So instead, and my kids are the worst. They're like, Mom, the neighbors are out. We should go play. I'm like, no, UK, And every time I'm like, okay, invite them for another cocktail. Invite them to another Christmas party. Invite them to barbecue with you. Go into the front yard and just say hi, even when they twitch a little. When you say, yeah, I was at church. And they're like, nah, True story. I'm challenged in this in my own life is what I'm telling you. I'm not standing up here today as like a professional at this. I do think Kyle and I have been challenged to be generous with our lives, and we're trying to do that. But even as I wrote this sermon this week, I felt both excited about the invitation of the Lord and scared at the same time. And it's okay if you sit here today and you feel that way. It's uncomfortable. It is easier to have your table for your best friends and your family that knows you and the people that bring you the most life. And Jesus by no means is saying never hang out with those people, right? But he is saying, hey, would you have eyes for others? And here's the thing. If you've never thought this way, if you've never thought like, how do I use my table for the mission of God? Because that's basically what we're talking about. Just start today. Who could I invite? Is there a family that I know is far from Jesus that I can then invite? Sometimes I have buffer families. I'm like, hey, best friends, come over. I'm going to invite this other family over and you're going to help me, right? Like, you can cheat. I love cheating, spiritually cheating. not literally cheating. No, there's ways to do this and be creative. And so I just want to take this last little minute to give you a really, really practical step that I thought about this week. Because there's many of you, you're like, I've never used my table. Some of you sit here with social anxiety and you're like, Anabeth, to open my home is like, I don't even know how to do that because I'm legitimately I'm scared around social moments. There's lots of reasons, right? There's old rejection. There's personality types. There's lots of reasons. But let me give you one really, really clear next step for yourself. You see, we have this thing in our church that we host here called Alpha. And Alpha is for people that are thinking about life with Jesus. And they're just kind of curious. But guys, it's 8 weeks, and every week we meet, we start with a meal because we think there's power in eating together. And so this is a good spot for you to start. You could cheat off of our church, meaning you could show up and say, I'm willing to host at Alpha and see how this goes. Because guys, what happens is you have a meal, then a video is played. They do all the work theologically for you. Can I just say this to us today? You don't have to have a theological degree to talk about Jesus. The most powerful thing you host inside of you that has to do with Jesus is your own story and how he's made himself real to you. You don't have to have the Bible memorized to talk about Jesus. All you have to do is say, this is what I was before Jesus, this is what he did to reveal himself to me, and this is who I am now because of Jesus. That's it. Guys, all you have to do is to show up to Alpha, let the video do the theological work, and then be willing to sit at a table with people that may say awkward things like, I'm not sure I believe that. And then you just go, why is that? And every time they end up saying, well, I had this bad thing happen in my life. I don't understand why God would let that happen. Or I was raised this way, and why is this more real than this? And you go, it's really funny. All I know is, and boom, you just start telling them your story. And so I want to invite you, if you're like, yeah, I'm one of those people that doesn't know how to open my home and put people around my table because it's scary, then come and join us at our table in Alpha. And then if you're like, oh, I've done that, that's fun, then do the next step. Invite one of your coworkers, invite one of your friends, invite one of your family members that doesn't know Jesus to Alpha, sit in Alpha with them. Guys, it's really fun to host Alpha, but it is a blast to walk someone through it. Just side by side with them. And then at the end, they're like, this Jesus guy's real. And you're like, he's real. He's changed everything about my life. Without Jesus, I should be nothing. I should probably be on the streets doing drugs with the way I was raised, if I'm just being honest with you. But because of Jesus, I am not. Because of Jesus and the way he's loved me, I know the fatherly love. I did not have a good father. I know the Father's love only because of the love offered through Jesus, personally. This is the radical work that Jesus has done in my life, and that's only like a bit of it. I have 2 million other things that he's saved me from. So today, if you're like,